Gordon Hamlin made a splash late last year when he revealed that pension obligations in the state of Connecticut exceed all current estimates. His ability to untangle the knot on public pensions is one of the reasons CCM asked him to be on our Property Tax Reform Commission. He is here with us today to talk about those findings and more. We'd like to thank our new premier sponsor at Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com. We'd also like to thank our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or our member municipal leaders. Gordon, thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to participate.
Excellent. So CCM members are already familiar with you through your work on the Property Tax Reform Commission. And you did a well-received presentation for our legislative committee meeting recently. But for the general public and the listeners at home, can you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm a retired lawyer. I practiced with a large firm in Atlanta for over 30 years. I was a trial lawyer. I had nothing to do with pensions or retirement issues, except that I was on our firm's retirement committee.
Okay.
And actually served as chair of that committee for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2013, my wife and I moved from our Atlanta area home to her hometown of Tuscumbia, Alabama, which is northwest Alabama. Helen Keller's birthplace is right down the street from us. And that's where we are now.
Oh, so you're coming from Alabama right now?
Yes.
Excellent. The wonders of the internet, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. So after I retired from my law firm and we had moved, by happenstance, I learned of a MOOC, one of these massive open online courses.
Massive online open courses, MOOC, okay.
MOOC, through the Stanford Graduate School of Business on the finance of retirements and pensions. Okay. So I thought, I've long been interested in these issues, so I signed up for it, along with 44,000 of my closest friends from all over the world.
Oh, okay.
And at the end of the course, I was one of 5 who were invited to participate in a forum at Stanford on creative solutions for public pensions. For my little team, our creative idea was that the state of Mississippi needed a constitutional amendment through its pension problems. And the professor thought that was a pretty cool idea. So I was one of the 5 who participated.
Okay.
And then I applied for a fellowship at Harvard in a program called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. And miraculously, I was selected. My story was there were 47 really amazing, accomplished people from all over the world. And then there was me, the retired lawyer from Tuscumbia, Alabama.
So a lot of people think that public pensions are not sustainable and that we need to switch the entire system to a 401k based system, just as most of the private sector has done at this point. What thoughts do you have about that idea for municipal governments?
Well, for starters, I sort of agree with the people who created the 401k. The Wall Street Journal ran an article about 3 years ago where they went back and interviewed all the people who had had a hand in creating the 401k. And to a person, all of those people who created the 401k regretted their role in doing this. Because they envisioned it as a supplement, a kind of a way for people to add to their retirement savings. In the retirement community, people talk about the 3-legged stool: Social Security, a pension, and then private savings. But what's happened in the private sector is the 401k has basically eliminated pensions. And that's
not the original intention.
That's what these people regretted. They're leaving with a 2-legged stool.
They were hoping for a supplement, not a replacement out of this.
But what it means is each person now has to worry about their longevity issues.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if I'm going to live to be 95,
You might be in
I'm
trouble.
on my own.
Yeah.
And I've got to save during my working years as if I'm going to live to be 95.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell you from experience that as you get older, people worry incessantly about outliving their assets. There's lots of data about the 401k world showing that it works pretty well for the top 10% of earners because they can treat
it
it.
does work well for some people, but not the other
Some people,
90%.
Not the vast majority.
Okay.
When I was on our firm's retirement committee, I watched some of my law partners really mismanage their own 401ks. And we had another plan called the HR10 or a KEO plan.
Mm-hmm.
But by self-directing their investments, they always were chasing the highest yields, got there a day late, and they always sold at the bottom and bought high, made terrible mistakes. So if these are well-educated people making these serious mistakes, what kind of chance does the average person have? And I say, not much.
And so, as you say, that part of the problem is actually there's a little bit too much choice on the part of the person as far as how it gets invested in the 401ks?
Well, it's, every person is not going to be Warren Buffett and be a pro investor.
Yeah.
So, expecting everybody to learn the ins and outs of the stock market and the bond markets is a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen.
So as something, perhaps, as we said earlier, that was intended as a supplement, maybe that makes sense for people to be able to try to do a little bit more. But as the base level, everyone needs enough to live on.
That's right.
Last year, when you were speaking to CCM members, you said that the retirement liabilities in Connecticut were about $125 billion based on fiscal year 2018 numbers. How did you go about calculating that?
Well, I took as a baseline the pension numbers from every municipality that has a pension plan. There are like 200 some odd local plans. There are some large state plans for the state employees, teachers' retirement system, the judges, and so forth, and then the municipal employees' retirement system. But I had to put all of those to a common discount rate in order to calculate the liabilities. So that meant that I needed to calculate the average duration of the liabilities. If you have a mature system with lots of old people, then your average duration might be 10 or 11 years. If you have a younger system, then your average duration of liabilities might be 14 years, something like that.
The age at which they're allowed to retire kind of impacts that.
That definitely impacts the duration of the liabilities, because if you retire at 60, you could live another 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And then some of course are going to die earlier. So that, when I had all those numbers, then I could calculate based on a new discount rate. So what I chose was a 5-year average of a corporate AA bond yield. Straight from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. So I had everybody on a common discount rate and a very particularized average duration of liabilities. Then I could calculate the pension liabilities. I took the liabilities for post-retirement healthcare, often referred to as OPEB, other post-employment benefits. And then there are some pension obligation bonds that are outstanding. Something like 6 or 7 municipalities have some outstanding. And then there's about $2 billion for teachers' retirement system. So I added up all of those and came up with right at $125 billion.
So that's the combination of municipal and state.
Yes.
So all the public
retirement liabilities. both for pensions and healthcare.
And did you have you come up with any updates based on fiscal year 2019?
Yes, I've gone through all of the audit reports that the municipalities have filed and the actuarial reports that state has filed and gone through the similar calculation. I've very refined the average duration of the liabilities down to every local plan. So it's very specific. And the updated discount rate over that 5-year period has actually gone up a little bit. But nonetheless, it's still rocking along about $125 billion.
Okay. So
even though the stock market really did well fiscal year 19, and even though the discount rate that I'm using increased a little bit, the liabilities still stayed static.
And that was due to what?
Because the contributions have been lower than what they should be.
Okay. So if the unfunded liabilities are at about 125 billion, how much is the annual debt service?
Well, the municipalities and the state are putting in about $5 billion into pensions and the OPEB and the debt service on the pension obligation bonds. So that's $5 billion, and between the municipalities and the state, total spending in the state is about $30 billion.
Okay.
So you're talking really 1/6
that,
of all public dollars goes for retirement liabilities.
1/6 of the total state and public spending is going right now to these liabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So if the employers are contributing about $5 billion towards retirement liabilities, how much are the employees contributing?
Altogether, between the local plans and the state plans, employees are contributing another $940 million. So that means there's about $6 billion that is going toward retirement liabilities every year.
These are some big numbers. And how does that $6 billion compare to payroll?
Well, it's approximately 55% of the local and state payrolls. I extracted all of that data when I was going through the audit reports, so I could have that number handy on my spreadsheet. 55% is an enormous figure.
Yeah, that's...
you know, when you have, say, a public safety plan, in most states, because you don't want 65 or 75-year-old police or firefighters running around, those are people who generally retire early, and for good reason.
Yeah, justifiably.
Justifiable. Those plans and a lot of other states have a normal cost that, you know, could be 25 to 35%. But in the state of Connecticut, when you're talking about 55% of payroll on average going to retirement liabilities, that's a huge number.
Talking about funding and, you know, what's coming from the employees and everything, have the state and all the municipalities been paying everything that they're required to pay?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no.
Okay.
The actuary computes something called an ADEC. It's the actuarially determined employer contribution. Okay. So the ADEC is what the employer is supposed to contribute. But that number is dependent on the discount rate that's being used to compute the liabilities. Okay. So if you use 8%, which a lot of Connecticut has been using historically, that makes your the present value of your liabilities look smaller. And therefore, you don't need to contribute as much. And for the last couple of years, the municipalities have been putting in about 97 or 98% of the ADEC. Times have been good. The economy's been pretty booming. Lots of sales tax, lots of property tax revenue, lots of income tax revenue has been flowing into the state and the local governments. So they've all been putting in what the actuary tells them they need to put in. But on the flip side, when you look at the last 20 years of investment returns, I went back and looked at what the large state plans and the largest local plan, namely Hartford, have generated. On an annualized basis, all of those plans have generated less than 6% annual returns. But they've been using 7.5 or 8% as their discount rate. So in other words, they've been underperforming their expectations.
So when they're hitting, you said 6, they were using 8. So is the problem that they need to have more realistic expectations, or do they need to find better ways the investments need to be better? Where's the problem there?
Well, that's always the push and pull.
Yeah.
The discount rate should be lower. The issue about investment returns, well, just as an example, the largest public pension plan in America is in California, CalPERS. There's an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today from the chief investment officer of CalPERS claiming we're going to hit 7% investment returns, and we're going to do it through more private equity investments, more private loan investments, and we're going to borrow money to leverage up these new investments. So in other words, we're really going to go out on the limb and take all kinds of risk
and get to 7, we hope.
Hope to get 7.
So 8 is probably very unrealistic.
That's right. Now, there's also a lot of academic research on what has generated the stock market rally of the last 10 or 11 years. For sure, the tax cuts from a couple of years ago really boosted corporate earnings. For the last decade, corporations have been the biggest buyers of their own stock. There's been a massive shift on their balance sheets from equity to debt. And at some point, there will be a day of reckoning for that. Because, there's a lot of public pension plans that need equities on their investments. And they're chasing a limited amount of stock.
There's only so much out there to get.
There's only so much out there. It's being sucked out of the market by buybacks. But, Congress made a lot of noises recently about trying to prohibit buybacks. And if there's no corporation buying back stock, and there are no other real buyers out there, what's going to happen?
Everything goes down.
Everything goes down. So, people like Bob Schiller at Yale are projecting that the next decade, equity markets are going to barely be scratching even, maybe even have slightly negative returns.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Sponsored by Digital Back Office and Palo Alto Technologies. Do you have a feel for what the average investment return to state and local plans are going to look like for this fiscal year when it ends in a couple weeks?
Well, if you had asked that question at the end of March, the answer would have been probably down about 20%. Now, the stock markets have rallied a little bit, at least until Friday, when everything was down. They're rallying a little bit today. But what seems to have happened in the last couple of months is that retail investors, people like you and me, have been racing to open brokerage accounts and get into the market to buy on this big dip. So it's not been institutional buyers of stock in the last month or two. Seems to have been a lot of retail investors. And historically, in the stock market, that's an ominous sign.
When the professionals are staying away and everyone else is trying to get in?
That's right. Everybody's favorite investor is Warren Buffett. And he's sitting on billions and billions of dollars in cash because he publicly states there's nothing out there that looks attractive for me to invest in.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to something I want to clarify. You say the average Connecticut, on average, Connecticut is already contributing about 55% of payroll towards retirement liabilities, and that it should have been contributing about 10% more of payroll for the last 20 years. What's going to happen next, given the economic turmoil that we're kind of all going through right now?
Well, it's no secret that sales tax revenue has taken a huge dip.
Mm-hmm.
When everybody is staying at home, restaurants are closed, nobody's spending any money.
Mm-hmm.
Income taxes are likely to go down. Property taxes will take a while to see any kind of significant hit, but we're already seeing some big changes in the commercial market.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for some municipalities, generates a fair chunk of their property tax revenue.
Yeah, well, in Connecticut, municipalities are dependent on the property tax.
Absolutely.
So that's a huge thing for us.
It'll take a while for home valuations to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
So property taxes really will be fairly stable, probably
for
most
at least the next year or whatever. Yeah.
But when all of this goes down,
Mm-hmm.
The overwhelming push is to find areas where you really don't have to spend the money.
Mm-hmm.
And pension contributions seem to always rise to the top of the checklist.
Yeah.
That we don't need to pay this year. That's what happened in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, the funded status of those plans took a dive, and it never recovered, despite the performance of the stock market for 10 years. So if you've got, this huge bull market for 10 years that failed to move the needle on the funded status of pension plans nationwide, after this year, we're going to see some decreases in the contributions that employers are making to these pension plans.
So if you had to name a single factor that was kind of the biggest problem facing Connecticut now with respect to its retirement liabilities, what would that be?
Well, I would say it's the problem of intergenerational equity.
Okay.
Connecticut is uniquely situated. If you look at some of the data on what the next generation is facing, really sobering.
And so when you talk about next generation, who are you referring to? People born?
Well, let's talk about the millennials.
Okay, millennials.
These people have the highest student debt in the country. On average, in Connecticut, it takes 14 years to pay off that student loan. You have one of the lowest marriage rates in the country, and the age of first marriage is the highest in the country. So millennials they've got this huge debt load. They're postponing marriages.
And marriage generally would help with these issues financially?
No, but because of debt. What kids actually, they're actually asking, their potential spouse, I need to know about the debt that you're carrying.
So the marriage being put off is an effect, not a cause.
It's an effect. Yeah, absolutely. Then you look at home ownership rates. In Connecticut, you have a low home ownership rate to start with. And the average age of first purchase is going up steadily. It's now into the 40s.
For first home purchases.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you've got this huge debt because of student loans, postpone marriage, you postpone home ownership, you postpone purchasing of cars, and you've got the third highest move out rate in the nation.
People leaving.
People leaving the state. And in 2015, that was a loss of income of $2.6 billion. Just gone. So that's income that would have been taxed, would have generated income for the state. you have the sixth oldest median age
Okay.
of people. So you're an older state.
We've got a lot of old people. The young people are not making enough money and they're moving.
That's right. And they're burdened with debt. So these are the people who are being asked to pay this $125 billion unfunded liability for the retirement of us baby boomers. It's a terrible problem. And it's very acute in Connecticut.
Yeah. And is that, you're from Georgia, you're in Alabama now, you said, is that part of what kind of got you interested in on the topic of Connecticut's problem? Because we unfortunately stand out in this arena?
Well, when I finished my fellowship at Harvard, I set up my little nonprofit, Pro Bono Public Pensions. And we mean exactly that. We take no fee for services. We do ask to have expenses reimbursed. CCM has been generous about doing that. My thought was that states with kind of an average burden would have been the best targets to transition to a better model, shared risk model. But, you know, chance experience that my wife had in the airport with somebody in California who, you know, when my wife told her that I had been at Harvard studying about public pensions, the woman's immediate reaction was, oh, like Illinois, it's such a shame what, you know, those people are going through.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that Illinois has got the worst pension problems in the country. And it just occurred to me that, well, maybe in those states that know they've got a big problem, maybe those are the target states that I ought to spend time on.
The ones that already say, we have a problem, how do we deal with this? Yeah.
Yeah, and in Connecticut, you are ideally situated, if you will. You've got a huge problem.
Yep.
You've got a well-educated populace that knows you've got a huge problem.
Yeah.
And you've only got 169 municipalities?
169, that's correct.
169. Your counties, for all practical purposes, are not players.
Nope.
So you've only got the local plans and the large state plans to deal with. Places like Pennsylvania have got 3,000 or more local plans.
So comparatively, even though it seems complicated to us, it's a smaller state with less moving parts to try to sort out?
That is exactly it in a nutshell.
So it might actually be a little bit more feasible to make some of these changes happen because of our size.
Right. You can be a leader in the clubhouse, if you will. It is more manageable to deal with your problems, even though they're huge. You know, 125 billion is, you know, not chump change.
No. You mentioned a little bit about this, but can you go more into what you think would be a good alternative to switch to from the 401k system? Like what kind should Connecticut be shooting for?
There are several really good models out there. These are plans that share risk among taxpayers, employees, and retirees. The most advanced model is in New Brunswick, the province of New Brunswick.
Canada, okay.
About 6 years ago, they transitioned to their new shared risk plans. They have done fabulously since then. They started off with some unfunded liabilities, but they have built up, so they now have over 100% of their liabilities covered if they have to liquidate tomorrow.
Okay.
But with the system that they use called an open group funded method, where they're looking at the present value of contributions that are higher than the so-called normal cost. They're actually funded at more than 130%. And that's calculating their liabilities with a discount rate of 4.75%.
Yep.
So even after the huge market declines in March, they were fine. They were going to keep paying COLAs. They were going to keep subsidizing early retirements, with lower discounts than people would otherwise have to pay, they were fine.
Okay.
Among the American states, Wisconsin retirement systems is the best.
Mm-hmm.
They also were going to be 100% funded using a discount rate of, I think the latest was about 5.4%
Okay.
this year, or at least as of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
But, these plans are all doing well. And for example, in New Brunswick, when they transitioned,
Mm-hmm.
they moved to longer working careers,
Okay.
but they had a transition into that so that somebody who was, say, a month shy of retirement.
Didn't suddenly get told they have to stick around for a few years.
That's right.
Okay.
Generally, for most people, it became 65.
Okay.
And public safety people, police and firefighters, it became 60. Police and firefighters who retire early often take a different kind of job
Mm-hmm.
and continue working well past their age 60. So there are lots of opportunity. There are lots of ways to structure it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in New Brunswick, they went over 100 different scenarios on how to structure their plan before they came up with something that all the unions and the government representing the taxpayers could support. But they engaged in lengthy bargaining and real careful investigation. They looked at models of defined benefit plans from all over the world.
Okay.
Find what looked best. And they have a lot of other features that are incorporated that we don't really have enough time today to get in.
When you mentioned New Brunswick, I'm just curious, what was the plan they had before, and is there any structural differences to the way the government stuff is set up there that we couldn't do down here, or is it more or less a very similar system?
Well, the problem in the states is that these pension plans all have constitutional or statutory protections.
Mm-hmm.
And the legislature can't just come in and say, tomorrow we're going to have a different plan.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only one lawful way to transition to a shared risk plan, and that is through Chapter 9 plans of debt adjustment. Okay, so this is part of the Bankruptcy Act. But don't get frightened. This is not, Chapter 9 is entirely different from what we're used to seeing on the personal or corporate level. When you think of bankruptcy, you think about liquidations. Chapter 9 works entirely differently. This can only be done by a municipality or county that has been specifically authorized by the state to use Chapter 9.
Okay.
It's entirely voluntary. The bankruptcy judge can't, change the tax rates, can't order, big changes. He can only approve or disapprove a plan that the municipality submits.
Okay.
The way this would work is you would go through the same kind of negotiations that New Brunswick did, get all the stakeholders together, work diligently with an actuary and a lawyer to come up with a new model that people could agree upon. You would take that new model to the legislature, say, here's what we've agreed on, enact this. Then the municipalities would then file their what are called prepackaged Chapter 9 plans of debt adjustment.
Okay.
So you'd walk into the bankruptcy court and say, we've already got an agreement on this plan. And the bankruptcy judge says, you've made my life easy.
Okay.
It's all approved.
So by the time something got past the legislature to the judge, it would kind of be paperwork sign-off sort of stuff. It's the challenge is the public will in the legislature.
There would be no further litigation. That would be the end of it. Yeah. Now for the state plans, for CSRS in particular, that's different. These are direct state employees. And as of this moment in time, states cannot use Chapter 9. They can't declare bankruptcy.
So municipalities can, but the state cannot.
That's right.
Okay.
They've had the option since the 1930s.
Okay.
But it was only because of the Great Depression that Congress began to authorize Municipalities, that's broadly defined, can be a county, anything, a political subdivision that the state authorizes, use Chapter 9. Unless Congress appropriates a lot of money for states and local governments, collectively, they've asked Congress to appropriate $750 billion. And you may have heard about the bill that the House passed, which I think it was about another $3 trillion, some of which was authorized a lot of money for states and local governments. Senate so far has not acted on any of that. This is an opportunity that the Senate could take advantage of to allow states to use Chapter 9 to adjust their retirement liabilities.
Yeah.
If Congress wanted to do that, it would be constitutional.
So originally it came out of the Great Depression, and now that we're facing another kind of big problem right now, this might be a time when there needs to and will be maybe some more forward motion on some of these things.
Yeah, there have been a number of people who have suggested that Congress attach conditions to whatever monies they appropriate for states and local governments.
Yeah.
And that could take a variety of forms. But you also have to remember that in Chapter 9, the creditors, the employees and retirees, get to vote.
Okay.
And they have to approve a plan before the bankruptcy judge can approve it. So if you say, well, I want the state of Connecticut to impose a 401k world, all of its pension plans, with the market doing what it's done, how many employees and retirees are going to say,
are going to vote for that?
Sign me up for a 401k. So that's not going to happen. You have to have a plan that people can look at and say, that's a solid plan.
This makes sense.
I understand it. It makes sense. It is going to be more secure. And that's the New Brunswick or Wisconsin model.
All right. So one other thing I wanted to touch on is some of the other things that are tied to this that we might not think of. So I know last year we also had a big controversy in Connecticut about how to pay for highways. Is there a relationship between things like that and the pension debt problem?
Well, you know, it's real interesting that you put it that way, because $125 billion liability. And I thought, he's been reading my stuff. So yeah, you know, you've got a huge infrastructure problem in Connecticut. And you've got a lot of education and healthcare spending that is also staring you in the face. Here's some more statistics. 59% of your bridges are over 50 years old. The American civil engineers say you need another 30 billion for roads over the next 30 years. And that's before we even get to education and healthcare. So if you're spending 1/6 of all your dollars on retirement issues, there's a crowding out that's
There's just not money left over for all these other things.
There's no money left over. And when you're looking at substantially decreased sales, income tax revenue this year, even things like hotel occupancy taxes, nobody's been staying at hotels. Think about what happened with Disneyland out in California. City of Anaheim, all of a sudden, had no hotel occupancy tax revenue.
Yeah.
They've taken huge hits. Now, you know, you're not as much of a tourist destination as Disneyland.
But we do have the casinos. We've got the shoreline is beautiful. A lot of
You've got plenty of hotels in Connecticut. All of them have been suffering in this pandemic. So they're, you know, all of these issues are interrelated, and there's only so much money to go around. You know, everybody wants security, and a retiree wants to know that what he's been or she has been promised in the way of a pension is going to be paid. And a current employee wants to know that when I retire, I'm going to be protected. And people who are paying income taxes want to know, is this problem going to be solved?
Yeah.
And so far, they're not seeing that on the horizon. So that brings us back to this intergenerational equity issue. And for me, that's the overwhelming one.
Yeah.
But everybody's got to understand this is a big problem, and it's not going to be solved with just one segment of the population bearing the entire sacrifice.
The leaders in Connecticut, what do they need to focus on in the future?
Well, I think the concept is going to have to be shared sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And if everybody understands it's being done in a fair way,
mm-hmm.
that means all stakeholders participating in solving the problem. You've got a long history of collective bargaining,
mm-hmm.
and that should be harnessed here. You know, what I'm suggesting is that employees and retirees and taxpayers, public representatives, all need to be involved in the negotiating process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be something that you negotiate overnight. Just like in New Brunswick, it took them months and months and months of hard
mm-hmm.
work and lots of calculations and lots of proposals before they came to something that everybody could live with.
Mm-hmm.
When they finally got that solution, the union members were there in the legislature celebrating with the conservative prime minister.
mm-hmm.
Probably none of them voted for, but they were all celebrating because they knew they had achieved something really remarkable
mm-hmm.
and that was fair at bottom line.
So basically, the leaders need to make sure that all the important people, all the people involved are given a seat at the table, and they need to be prepared to sit down, and it's going to take some work. It's going to take a while.
Everybody knows this is a huge problem. And unless the directive is given, we've got to solve this problem. Let's get started. Let's get the people together and come together to find a solution. That's the initiative that needs to take place, at least in my humble opinion, as an outsider from Tuscumbia, Alabama.
Well, sometimes the outsider opinion is good. You know, someone that's not directly involved like we are on a daily basis to really say, no, this is really a problem.
I'm not a taxpayer in Connecticut. I'm just an independent observer. I've tried diligently to study the legal aspects of all this,
mm-hmm.
the structure of the pension plans. All of these things are important. When I was a practicing lawyer, you know, there were three areas of law that I did not touch.
Mm-hmm.
Family law, criminal law, and bankruptcy law.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've had to learn something about Chapter 9 in the Bankruptcy Act, which actually very few lawyers ever come across.
Mm-hmm.
There just have not been very many municipal filings, and they've been scattered across the country. Mm-hmm. So in the large law firm environment, there are not many people who do work on public pensions. There are not many who do work on Chapter 9s. So it's a kind of slim bench from which to draw.
Well, I'd like to thank you for being on the show today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks to our premier sponsor, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks, which you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com. Also thanks to Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more about them at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.